said the north was empty, a crown of ice where even memory could not take root. Yet, when the heavens unroll their green banners, and the cold itself begins to glow, who can swear that nothing lives beneath that light? The sky over the pole does not merely shine, it speaks. Its voice is a long, shimmering breath, and if you stand very still, so still that your pulse seems carved from Aurora, you will hear it say a name that is older than frost. Not a paradise, not a heaven, a city, Azgard, not a cloud fortress in a child's tale, but a nation that walked the line between substance and radiance, nearer to daylight than to dust, but built by hands that bled and learned and grieved. In an age when the sun stood higher, when the stars seemed fixed to a lone northern pin, the world's spine rose through the white and met the firmament. Men gave that axis many names: the world tree, the pillar of heaven, the unsetting nail of the north. Priests timed their rites to its steady point. Mariners read it as a letter from the gods. Architects dreamt angles with their faces turned toward it, and children fell asleep making constellations of its steadiness. That spine was not wood and leaf alone. It was alignment of ground with sky, of body with soul, of knowledge with reverence. Along that alignment, a people founded a city and taught it to sing. Later ages would remember only fragments: an auroral bridge called Bifrost, a high court of radiant halls, a son of wisdom who wandered under many names. But the first stories did not begin with thunder. They began with listening. The founders were listeners before they were builders, men and women who mapped the whispering lines of the earth, those subtle veins of breath that run beneath tundra and sea. With drums of stretched hide and rods of black stone, they traced the currents no eye could see. When the sky burned in winter and the sea carried mirrors instead of waves, they found correspondences, star to hill, magnet to bone, voice to granite, and learned that matter is obedient to pattern. From pattern came design. From design, walls. From walls, civilization. Call it the Aurora Age. The calendar of that time is a broken relic to us. We count years by empires and ashes. They counted them by returns of a particular light, by the wheels of constellations, by breaths of the pole. They raised towers whose tips drank starlight as a chalice drinks wine, and at the foot of those towers, they etched signs that were half speech, half music. We call those signs runes, and we recall them as letters. But the first readers knew them as instructions to the world. Invitations for stone to carry sound, for bronze to remember touch, for minds to meet without air between them. Do not imagine the north as blind rage of cold. There were seasons, but tuned differently. Long day, long dusk, long night, grand chords instead of hurried notes. Under that slow sky, the builders of Azgard learned patience. They learned that a beam set slightly off the star will sag into error after an age, that thought unmoored from awe grows sharp and thin, that awe unmoored from thought drowns in its own depth. And so, two lines formed within their single people, not two tribes, not two races, but two tempers of the same flame. The keepers of light took measure of the heavens and wrote the measures into metal and stone. The seekers of silence held the inward vigil and mapped the chambers of the unseen. For a time, knowledge and reverence breathed in the same lungs. For a time, the city's heartbeat matched the pulse of the Aurora. The old poets in lands far south of snow caught hints and wrote them as best they could. A Greek mariner heard of a place beyond the winds where swans whitened the air, and the sun rose low, singing, and he called it Hyperborea. A Roman geographer marked Thule at the edge of the known map and left the parchment ragged where the sea demanded more ink than he had. In the east, hymns praised a dawn that lasted too long for myth and not long enough for arithmetic. In the far north, a shaman beat a drum painted with 9 tears and a branching tree. And no scholar now can tell whether he made a cosmology or a memory. Azgard did not steal the gods, it taught the gods to speak. When the city raised its central hall, a vast chamber of columns that were themselves instruments, the builders tuned the stones until a whisper at one gate would arrive at the throne as a clear syllable. The throne did not raise kings above men. It lowered silence to meet speech. The leader who sat there was not merely a ruler. He was a listener who gave back answers in the shape of decisions. His crown was an iron ring encircling the brow, etched with signs of direction and restraint. And when he left the throne, he set that ring upon the pillar of the hall, so that no man mistook the office for the man. It was not all harmony. Never trust a city that claims it never argued. They debated what was permissible to ask of the world. If a tower could sing a vessel across the sea, could it sing a soul out of grief? If a stone remembered a voice, could it erase another? One guild proposed to bend the Aurora itself into a road. Another warned that roads invite armies. The singers wanted bridges. The watchers wanted thresholds. Then, as now, wisdom was a tug-of-war with a river between. But in this beginning, this first high morning of Azgard, there was mostly making, and that making wore gratitude like a cloak. Children learned to set a needle floating in water and bow to the direction it chose. Smiths learned to temper iron while the lights were thickest. The metal held a gentler grain when quenched under green fire. Fishermen laid nets by the tides of the moon and the faint pull of the northern star. Even grief learned its manners. Mourners walked out beneath the Aurora and felt that no loss could be absolute where the sky itself was a lantern. Will you come later inherit a thorny question? If such a city stood, if men found a way to yoke reverence and intellect to a common plow, how did we lose the furrow? The first answer is tilt. The earth is no fixed wheel, it leans and listens, then leans again. The long balances of the pole shifted a breath. A breath is enough. Summers shortened, winter tightened its fingers. The auroras, once a steady choir, became troubled, louder, redder, crossed by unseasonal flickers. Charts grew wrong at their edges, while remaining correct at the center, which is the cruelest way for error to arrive. A few among the keepers of light argued that the towers must be recalibrated by degrees, invisible to common sight. A few among the seekers insisted that the towers were the reason for disturbance, that the world had noticed the city's music and begun to answer in thunder. Arguments swell like tides. Above the pole, even tides are oracles. Yet this is not the place to recount the breach, not yet. An introduction must open the door, not slam it. Know only this: before any sundering, before any exile, before the word fall became an iron gate in the mouth, Azgard breathed. It taught its children to align eyes with Polaris and hearts with measure. It taught its artisans that beauty is the discipline of attention made visible. It taught its leaders that a decision is a tool which must be oiled with doubt. It taught its healers that the human frame is an instrument the world longs to tune, and it wrote its last and greatest lesson into the very sky. Light is not merely what lets you see. Sometimes it is what remembers you, because light remembers. Ask the old sailors who swore that the northern glow answered their songs with subtle ripples. Ask the storytellers who placed a bridge of color between men and immortals. Ask the monasteries perched at the margins of ice, whose bells refuse to freeze. Even when cities fall, even when libraries drown, the world keeps an echo where a truth once stood. The Aurora is such an echo, and the echo keeps a syllable in its throat. If you listen long enough, you can hear the syllable become a name. Azgard. We are taught to hunt ruins with spades and chisels, to date the age of a wall by the moss that takes on its shadow. There is wisdom in that, but some ruins are written in movement. The slow drift of the pole is a scar. The curve of migratory paths is a signature. A forgotten harmony echoes in remote languages that ring like hammered silver when they speak of north and brightness and a throne between worlds. Traces of a science are folded in letters we treat as charms. The old rune ansas, breath, God, articulation, is also the diagram of a hall where air is braided. The rune alges, protection, elk, is a figure of hands raised toward the sky's river, fingers spread to feel its current. We catalog these shapes as folklore. They were once instructions. You may ask, why tell this now? Because time has a taste, and of late the air carries a flavor that is half remembered. In observatories near the edge of night, instruments are catching whispers between the patient lines of the earth's field. In laboratories where sound is asked to lift stone, a subtle courtesy returns when the light outside is green. In the north of the world, where ice should be a tyrant, there are winter dawns that behave like spring in their color, and men stand with their mouths open without knowing whether they are worshiping or measuring. The old division between keepers and seekers is thawing. A city breathes more easily when its lungs remember they are one. So let this introduction be a lantern at the mouth of a tunnel, not a sermon at the edge of a storm. What follows is not an argument for miracles. It is a chronicle of a people who learned to treat the world as a listening thing. We will walk the high morning when towers sang and the sea hummed in sympathetic joy. We will step into the long dusk when even wisdom grew tired. We will follow the wanderer who carries the ring of office on a leather cord and trades answers for questions across continents. We will kneel with the last archivists as they fold a library into a handful of signs and trust the wind to keep them safe. And we will stand, at last, under a sky that remembers more than we do, and ask whether a city can choose to become a frequency rather than a ruin. For now, for this hour between questions, stand at the threshold. The pole is above you like a nail hammered into blue metal. The lights are words unbound, drifting down in silent lines. The sea waits without impatience. Somewhere ahead rises a hall whose pillars are resonant bones, a bridge that appears when a song is true, a throne that prefers listeners to lords. This is the gate of Azgard. Step lightly. Do not demand wonder, let it overhear you. And if the air grows warmer as the sky grows brighter, do not be afraid. You are not lost. You are nearing the city that taught the North how to speak. Part 1. When the sun stood still. In the earliest memory of the world, before men had calendars or fear, the sun did not travel across the heavens as it does now. It lingered near the horizon, unhurried and eternal, casting a copper-gold light over a world that never knew full darkness. Seasons were gentle transitions rather than battles between heat and frost. The air was thick with clarity. Mountains shone with ice that never melted, and the oceans reflected the sky so perfectly that sailors could not tell where the clouds ended and the sea began. It was a world in balance, fragile, flawless, and self-aware. At the heart of that balance stood a city unlike any that would ever follow Azgard, the citadel of the North. Built where the earth's spine pierced the heavens, it was less a settlement than a convergence point between dimensions. The oldest stones of its foundations were aligned not to the equator or meridian, but to the invisible field of magnetic breath that pulsed through the planet's poles. When the Aurora rose at night, it crowned the city like a living halo, painting its towers in green fire and blue flame. Travelers approaching from the frozen plains would see it shimmering on the horizon and whisper that they had reached the place where the world itself began to think. The inhabitants of Azgard called themselves the Azhari, meaning those who awaken with light. They were not gods, though later ages would make them so. They were people who had learned to hear the rhythm of the cosmos. They studied how wind sang between mountain passes, how the stars moved with the slow pulse of the earth, how the breath of a living creature could alter the tone of a stone instrument. Every discovery became a building. Every question became a craft. To them, science and spirit were two languages of the same alphabet. Their architecture reflected this unity. The city was laid out in concentric circles, radiating outward from the hall of the horizon, the oldest and most sacred structure in the world. Built of white basalt and copper, its domes were designed to catch sunlight even when the sun barely moved. At the hall's center stood a tall column of transparent crystal, the pillar of breath, which resonated with the hum of the earth. When a person spoke near it, the sound would spiral upward, multiply, and vanish into the roof's open oculus. During certain nights, when the magnetic winds were strongest, the pillar would glow faintly from within, answering the Aurora with a silent pulse. Asgard's life revolved around the study of resonance. Every craft, from smithing to healing, was based on the idea that vibration was the essence of existence. Blacksmiths tuned their forges according to pitch. They believed the right note could temper metal better than heat alone. Physicians measured the frequency of the human voice to diagnose illness. The city's most gifted scholars built great sound libraries, chambers filled with bowls, chimes, and plates that captured echoes from specific days of the year. Even the city's water channels were designed to flow in spirals, each turn calibrated to produce a low hum that harmonized with the prevailing wind. They believed that harmony was health, both for the body and the world. And for thousands of years, that harmony endured. The Azhari grew wise, patient, and contemplative. Conflict was rare, not because they were incapable of it, but because they had learned that every discord in the heart created a fracture in the sky. They lived by a single law inscribed at the city's gate. What is built in balance endures in eternity. But eternity, as they would soon learn, was not meant for the living. The first signs of change were subtle: a slight drift in the stars, a longer dusk, a faint chill in the air. To the untrained eye, nothing seemed amiss. Yet the astronomers of Azgard, who tracked the heavens through mirrored pools and carved stones, saw the difference at once. The North Star was moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to shatter the mathematical perfection upon which the city was built. The earth had begun to tilt. At first, the scholars welcomed the discovery. They saw in it an opportunity to expand their understanding of the cosmos. But the elders, those who had built the Hall of the Horizon, grew uneasy. They whispered that the world had been in tune, and that this shift, this new wobble of heaven, was not growth, but imbalance. The great pillars' glow dimmed earlier each night. The aurora flickered unpredictably, shifting from serene green to burning red. The lakes near the city began to freeze for the first time in recorded history. The Azhari Council met in the hall for 7 days and nights. The keepers of light, engineers, astronomers, and architects argued that the earth was simply finding a new equilibrium, and that Asgard must adapt its designs to the altered heavens. The seekers of silence, philosophers, healers, and mystics, believed the change reflected an internal corruption among their own people. They said that mankind's growing pride had disturbed the very forces it sought to harmonize. The debate split the city. The keepers began construction of new observation towers, using alloys that could withstand the increasingly cold winds. The seekers retreated to the lower sanctuaries, conducting rituals of purification, hoping to restore the world's balance through meditation and song. What had once been a single mind now divided into two halves, intellect and spirit, both sincere, both convinced of their righteousness. Meanwhile, the sky continued to change. The aurora brightened unnaturally, bending into shapes that had never appeared before: spirals, arcs, and even vast geometrical patterns, as if the heavens themselves were trying to communicate. The the citizens began to sense an invisible pressure in the air, a vibration too low to hear, but too deep to ignore. Animals fled south. The ocean currents altered, bringing storms from regions that had once been calm. In the third winter after the tilt began, a group of young inventors led by a visionary named Havre, a disciple of the keepers, proposed an audacious experiment. They believed the Aurora was not a warning, but a source of untapped energy, a bridge between worlds that could be harnessed. Havre designed a structure unlike anything ever attempted, a vast, spiraling arch of copper and orichalcum that would channel the auroral current directly into the earth. It was named the Bridge of Fire, for it was meant to link heaven and soil through light itself. Many opposed the project, warning that to interfere with the sky was to rewrite the world's song. Yet curiosity triumphed over caution. On the longest day of that motionless sun, the bridge was completed, a luminous arc stretching above the city, trembling with energy. When Havre and his team activated the mechanism, the Aurora exploded across the heavens, brilliant and blinding. For a moment, all of Azgard glowed like a star. Then came the silence. The light collapsed. The pillar in the hall of the horizon shattered with a single resonant crack. Every compass in the city spun wildly. Every chime fell mute. And for the first time in recorded history, the sun sank below the horizon. Night fell upon Azgard. At first, the people were awestruck. The stars, long unseen in their full clarity, appeared in their millions, a new tapestry across the sky. But awe soon turned to dread. The cold deepened beyond anything they had known. Crops withered. The rivers froze. The great towers, once glowing with warmth, began to crack under sheets of ice. The harmony that had sustained them for millennia broke apart like glass. Some blamed Havre, others the council. The seekers said the catastrophe was divine retribution. The keepers argued it was natural consequence. Yet in their hearts, both knew the truth. They had reached beyond their understanding. Still, even as their world collapsed, the Azhari refused despair. They adapted with the resilience that had once made them great. They built furnaces fueled by the magnetic ores beneath their mountains. They developed shelters that amplified human warmth. They learned to weave light through crystals, creating spheres that glowed softly in the dark. But these were acts of survival, not triumph. Asgard, once a city that sang with the cosmos, now whispered only to itself. Generations passed in the dimming twilight. The stories of the age when the sun stood still became sacred legend. Children were told that once the heavens had listened to man's voice. The elders spoke of a time when light obeyed the will of harmony. But no one could remember what that harmony sounded like anymore. And yet, something within them endured. Even as they shivered under the endless cold, even as storms buried the lower districts, the people of Asgard continued to look north, toward the silent, flickering sky, and wonder whether the gods they had once been mistaken for were still watching. In the centuries that followed, the survivors would spread south, carrying fragments of the old knowledge, fragments that would seed the myths of later ages. The runes, the sacred songs, the belief that wisdom came from the pole. But all of that belonged to another story. For now, the age of stillness was over. The world had begun to turn. The perfect balance had been broken, and motion, unpredictable, irreversible, alive, had entered creation. Asgard's towers still stood, half buried in frost, glowing faintly beneath the Aurora. Their resonance had changed, their song had deepened. And in that deeper tone, in that slow, trembling hum that rose from the bones of the earth, a new melody began, one that would echo through ages, reshaping myth, memory, and mankind itself. The sun, at last, was moving, and with it, the fate of all who had dared to touch the light. Part 2. Songs Beneath the Aurora. After the long stillness broke, and the first true night descended upon the world, Asgard endured like a heart beating beneath a frozen sky. The age of perfect light had ended, yet the people of the north refused to surrender to darkness. They lived between two eternities, the memory of the sun that once stood still, and the uncertainty of the new heavens that now drifted above them. In this fragile space, the Azhari began to learn the art of endurance, and from that endurance, they sang again. When the sun departed, the Aurora became their only companion. It would sweep across the heavens in vast curtains of color, whispering in tones only the most patient ears could understand. The Azhari gathered on the high terraces of their city and watched the lights ripple like the breath of the gods. The elders said it was the voice of the earth itself, the planet mourning its lost harmony. The young believed it was the bridge between worlds, a remnant of the power their ancestors once held. Whatever it was, they listened, and listening became their survival. The city that had once gleamed under the endless day now shone with colder beauty. Its towers, once radiant with copper and flame, were sheathed in frost, their domes glittering like mirrors of ice. Beneath the frozen roofs, life continued. The Azhari lit great furnaces in the mountain caverns below and carved warm corridors through the rock. They learned to harness the mineral fire that burned deep within the earth, channeling it into their halls. Slowly, Asgard became two cities, one above, silent and crowned by Aurora, one below, humming with the quiet pulse of resilience. Though divided by stone, both have shared a single purpose: to understand what the sky had become. The scholars and soundsmiths, descendants of the ancient keepers of light, built new instruments of resonance, great bowls of polished metal, arches strung with threads of crystal, and towers tuned to the frequency of the heavens. When the Aurora blazed, these structures trembled with faint harmonies, and the people would gather to hear them sing. They called these gatherings the songs beneath the Aurora, and in their music, they sought not mastery, but remembrance. Their chronicles tell that every color of the sky carried meaning. The green lights spoke of renewal, the red warned of imbalance. The rare blue shimmer was believed to be mercy. On those nights when the sky turned violet, the city would fall completely silent. even the furnaces dimmed, and the people would stand together in stillness, waiting for the light to pass. It was said that during such hours, one could hear the earth dreaming. In time, the Azhari discovered that certain stones, when struck during the auroral storms, would hold echoes of the sound for hours. They called these memory stones, and from them arose a new form of knowledge. The city's scholars began to record the tones of the sky itself, its deep pulses, its tremors, its subtle music. They compiled these sounds into what they named the Codex of Breath, a living record of the planet's heartbeat. To touch those stones was to hear the earth's lament, and to remember that even in loss, creation still spoke. Yet while knowledge returned, unity did not. The great division between the seekers and the keepers, once a mere argument of philosophy, hardened into a wound. The keepers sought to rebuild the science of the past, to recreate the crystalline towers, to measure the Aurora's power, to reclaim control of the heavens. The seekers warned that the sky could no longer be commanded, that mankind's task was not to rebuild what was lost, but to learn humility before the living cosmos. One path reached upward, the other inward. Between them, tensions simmered like buried fire. It was during this age that the first wanderers began to arrive from the outer regions, tribes fleeing the encroaching ice, guided by legends of warmth and light. They came in slow caravans, following the Aurora as if it were a river in the sky. Among them were hunters from the western forests, nomads from the steppe, and seafarers whose boats had turned to coffins in the frozen tide. Azgard opened its gates to them, not out of charity, but because the city itself longed for new voices. Many perished before reaching the walls. Those who survived became part of something greater. Their languages, their songs, their myths, all were woven into the growing tapestry of Asgard's identity. From these newcomers came stories of the world beyond, seas turning to ice, mountains cracking under new frost, beasts migrating toward the equator. It became clear that the catastrophe was not confined to the north. The balance of the entire planet had shifted. The tilt that had broken the sun's stillness now reshaped every horizon. Asgard stood at the center of this new age, not as a ruler, but as a witness. The scholars of the Codex sought to understand this transformation. They discovered that the Aurora was more than light. It was energy, a living current that connected the earth to the upper realms. The old myths of the Bifrost Bridge, once dismissed as allegory, began to seem like memory. Perhaps the bridge had never truly fallen. Perhaps it had only changed form. The Aurora, they realized, was the last visible thread between the worlds. So began a new discipline, the Order of Resonance, formed of scientists, mystics, and artisans who believed the Aurora could be read like scripture. They built observatories of crystal and metal at the city's edge, their domes open to the wind, filled with instruments that captured both sound and light. Night after night, they watched the heavens, tracing every flicker, every tremor. And gradually, patterns emerged, cycles of color and rhythm, pulses that corresponded to the movements of the earth below. They they began to speak of the symphony of the spheres, a cosmic harmony that bound all things. But with revelation came danger. The more the resonance studied, the more they noticed that the Aurora was changing again. It grew violent, unpredictable. At times it descended so low that the air shimmered with static, burning the skin and darkening the snow. Once, an entire tower was struck by a spiral of crimson light. It stood intact, but hollowed, its stone walls humming like a drum. The people took it as a warning, a sign that the sky itself was growing restless under their gaze. The elders of Azgard gathered in the hall of the horizon, now repaired, but left unadorned, a monument to both pride and survival. There, the leader of the order spoke. The world is turning toward silence. If we do not listen, it will forget us. His words spread through the city like an echo through a canyon. That night, the Aurora burned brighter than ever before, a storm of green and gold that lasted until dawn. Many believed it was an answer. Life in Azgard continued under that haunting beauty. The streets glowed with crystal lamps fed by minerals that stored the Aurora's light. The people learned to weave thin metal fibers into their garments to trap warmth. Farmers in the lower caverns grew pale crops nourished by reflected sunlight. Children were taught to read the sky as their ancestors once read books, to sense storms by color, to measure days by tone. A new rhythm was born, one that matched the slow heartbeat of a world learning to live again. Yet beyond the walls, the land was dying. The forests to the south turned to plains of ash-gray frost. Rivers froze mid-flow, leaving the fish trapped in perfect glass. Herds of mammoth and elk wandered aimlessly, following instincts the climate no longer obeyed. The people of Azgard watched the horizon and understood that their era was drawing toward another threshold. Survival alone would not be enough. The world itself was asking for migration. It was during these years of contemplation that a man appeared at the city's gates, a tall wanderer with frost in his beard and eyes that reflected the green of the northern light. His name was Odin, though at that time it was not yet a title, but a name like any other. He came from the farthest reaches of the western ice, claiming to have walked for months guided by the Aurora. With him came stories of people scattered, of kingdoms swallowed by snow, of voices in the wind calling men toward the north. He spoke of destiny, of cycles, of worlds reborn through loss. Odin was welcomed into Azgard, not as a ruler, but as a seer. He walked the city's halls in silence, listening to the instruments, watching the lights, learning the codex. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He said that the Aurora was not a remnant, it was a door, a threshold between the visible and the unseen, between what was lost and what waited to return. When the sky sings, he told the council, it remembers. His arrival changed everything. The order of resonance turned their studies toward prophecy. The seekers called him the harbinger of renewal. The keepers, still wary of mysticism, called him a wanderer with dangerous faith. But in Odin's quiet conviction, the people found something they had long forgotten: purpose. He reminded them that the fall of Azgard was not the end of its story, transformation. Under his guidance, the city began to prepare for a new journey. The resonance constructed instruments that could preserve the harmonies of the Aurora, memory orbs made of clear stone that stored not words, but tones. The scribes inscribed new runes upon bronze plates, blending the languages of the old world with those of the tribes who had come from afar. And deep beneath the hall of the horizon, the artisans forged what they called the seeds of light, small devices said to carry the resonance of Azgard itself, to awaken harmony wherever they were taken. The day would come when those seeds would scatter across the world, carried by those who fled the north. But that day had not yet arrived. For now, Asgard still breathed beneath the Aurora, its people standing between remembrance and rebirth. Above them, the sky shimmered like a veil of memory, alive with color and song. The world was no longer still, but in its motion, it promised something new, a rhythm that would one day echo through ages, long after the city itself was gone. The storytellers say that on the final night of that age, Odin climbed to the highest tower and watched the heavens burn in hues of gold and violet. The light bathed the city in fire, and every window shone like molten glass. He turned to those gathered behind him and said, "When the light fades, follow its song." Then he descended, and the Aurora dimmed, and the dawn that followed was the last Asgard would ever see unbroken. Thus ended the age of songs, the calm before the wandering, the melody before the silence. The world had begun to move again, and with it, destiny itself. Part 3. The Shadow Within the Sky. When the dawn finally came after that last auroral storm, the light felt wrong. It was thin, fragile, hesitant, as though the sun itself no longer trusted the world it illuminated. The air, once full of a low golden hum, seemed quieter, emptied of something unseen but vital. The people of Asgard awoke beneath that pale sky and understood, without words, that their age of beauty was passing. The harmony that had held their realm together for millennia had been broken, and though the city still stood, its soul was beginning to drift. The earth had turned again. The tilt, once subtle, had deepened. Winters stretched longer. Summers shrank into brief bursts of light. Rivers that once flowed with molten ice now froze to their cores. The forests withdrew southward, their treetops black against the growing cold. Yet within the walls of Asgard, life endured slower, quieter, more deliberate. The great furnaces roared beneath the mountains, their heat fed by veins of dark, or that pulsed with faint magnetism. The halls glowed red like embers in a dying hearth. But above ground, the sky had changed its face. The Aurora no longer sang in gentle colors. It tore itself apart in violent swirls, crimson bleeding into white, emerald colliding with violet. Sometimes it shone so bright that shadows disappeared. Other times it vanished entirely, leaving the world in darkness so pure that even the stars looked unfamiliar. The Azhari, who had once found peace in the sky's voice, now began to fear it. Some said the heavens had grown angry. Others whispered that the sky was mourning its own silence. For the first time, since the city's founding. The Aurora became an omen of division. The Keepers of Light, who had rebuilt their knowledge after the fall of the Bridge of Fire, declared that the changing heavens were natural, the earth simply finding balance after the Great Shift. They believed the Aurora could still be mastered, that new instruments of resonance could be built to stabilize the magnetic tides. They spoke of towers that would once again hum in tune with the planet, of light restored through craft and precision. But the seekers of silence saw something else. To them, the sky's violence was the reflection of mankind's inner discord. They said that Azgard had once been in harmony with creation, but pride had made them deaf to the will of the cosmos. Their remedy was not invention, but surrender, purification, stillness, and remembrance. They called upon the people to cease their building, to extinguish the fires, to let the earth rest. Between these two visions, the city began to fracture. Families split their loyalties. Workshops closed. Temples, once filled with shared hymns, echoed with opposing prayers. In the archives, scholars debated whether the Codex of Breath should be expanded or sealed. Even the children of Azgard could sense the tension, the way voices carried sharper edges, the way the air seemed heavier in the streets. What had once been a civilization united by resonance was now out of tune with itself. In the midst of this unrest, Odin watched. He had lived among the Azhari long enough to understand both sides of the divide. His heart, they said, carried the silence of the world before speech. His eyes saw beyond what the Aurora revealed. To the Keepers, he was a reminder of the lost glory they sought to reclaim. To the Seekers, he was the embodiment of acceptance, a wanderer who had made peace with impermanence. He listened, but he did not choose. And then, on a night when the sky burned red from horizon to horizon, he spoke. He called the city to the Hall of the Horizon, that ancient heart of Azgard, which had witnessed the rise and fall of every age. The people gathered beneath its broken dome, bathed in the crimson light that spilled through the open roof. Odin stood before them, his cloak rimmed with frost, and said, "The heavens no longer answer because they wait for us to speak truth. We have sung to the stars as if they were our servants, not our kin. The world does not punish, it remembers. And memory, once wounded, heals not with noise, but with silence. We must return to the path that does not command the sky, but walks beside it." His words divided them further. The Seekers wept, believing he spoke for them. The Keepers accused him of abandoning the legacy of Azgard. The debate that followed raged for 7 days and nights, until thunder, something unseen for generations, broke over the north. Lightning tore through the Aurora like a blade. For a moment, all the city's instruments cried out at once, strings snapping, bowls cracking, metal groaning. And then came silence. That silence lasted 3 days. No wind moved. No light shone. The world seemed to hold its breath. And when the Aurora returned, it was no longer green or red, but white, blinding, colorless, almost holy. The Azhari fell to their knees, terrified. Some believed it was the end. Others said it was the beginning. The truth was neither. It was change. In that white dawn, the resonance that had once bound Asgard's towers faltered completely. The magnetic pulse of the earth shifted southward. The instruments lost their harmony. The northern lights retreated, and the warmth that had lingered for ages drained away. Snow began to fall in silence, not the gentle flakes of memory, but heavy, endless drifts that swallowed roads and buried walls. The great towers disappeared one by one beneath veils of ice. The once golden domes dulled to gray. The age of light had ended. The age of shadow had begun. Yet even in ruin, Asgard's heart refused to die. Beneath the frozen city, deep in the caverns where the furnaces burned, the remaining scholars gathered the relics of their knowledge, fragments of the codex, the runes of harmony, the memory stones that still glowed faintly with auroral fire. They knew they could not save the city, but they could save its voice. Odin was among them. He urged them to preserve not their inventions, but their understanding. What is lost to the sky, he said, may yet live in man. And so they began to inscribe their wisdom into small crystalline tablets, each no larger than a man's palm. They called them seeds of light, vessels of resonance, meant to carry the essence of Asgard into the world beyond the ice. The seekers, the healers, the smiths, all contributed their craft. When each tablet was finished, it was sealed in a sphere of frozen glass and marked with the symbol of the pole. A circle divided by a vertical line, balance between earth and heaven. When the great storm came, they were ready. It began with a roar that shook the mountains. The Aurora descended like a wave, touching the towers directly. Fire without flame swept through the air, silent, invisible, magnetic. Stone turned to dust, metal hummed and melted. The city's domes collapsed inward, their weight carried by centuries of memory. The snow glowed from within, as if lit by the dying breath of the sun. In that storm, the last of the towers fell. From the high mountains, those who had fled watched as the once golden city vanished beneath the flood of white. For 3 days the sky burned, for 3 nights it wept. And when the storm cleared, Asgard was gone, its streets buried beneath a glacier, its halls entombed in ice. Only the faint shimmer of the Aurora lingered, marking where the city had been. Yet, as the storytellers say, nothing truly ends that has once been in harmony. Those who survived carried the seeds of light across the wilderness, south through the mountains, west along the frozen rivers, east toward the dawn. They became wanderers, their tongues carrying the memory of a lost golden city. Wherever they went, they built new sanctuaries, small and humble, always aligned to the northern star. They whispered to the night the old songs of balance, and the earth seemed to remember them. Over generations, their stories changed shape. The luminous city became the realm of gods. The scholars became divine kings. The fall of Asgard became Ragnarök, the twilight of the divine. But within the heart of those myths, hidden like an ember beneath ash, the truth endured. Once, long ago, mankind lived in harmony with the world. Once, they listened to the light, and somewhere beneath the eternal ice, the city still slept, not destroyed, but waiting. For though the Aurora no longer spoke to men, its light never died. Even now, on the coldest nights of the north, when the world is silent and the stars hang motionless, the sky still shimmers with faint color. It is said that if one listens closely, the air itself hums low, distant, like the memory of a song. The people of the north call it the breath of Azgard, and the wise among them know what it means. The gods were not lost. They only went home. Part 4. The Wandering Kings. When the light storm swallowed Azgard, the world trembled as though the heavens themselves had taken a breath too deep to exhale. The Aurora roared with soundless fire. The ice split open like stone under song, and the great city, the bridge between man and creation, vanished beneath waves of white radiance. Those who survived saw the world end not with thunder, but with silence. For 3 nights, they wandered the ruins of what once had been perfection. Where towers once rose like spears of light, only frozen mists remained. The great domes were shattered, the halls filled with snow and echoes. The air still hummed faintly, the aftersong of Asgard's voice sinking into the bones of the earth. The survivors felt it in their chests, a slow vibration that seemed to whisper, "Leave." And so they did. They carried with them what little could be saved: shards of the codex of breath, the crystalline seeds of light, and the memory of resonance, the lost art of tuning the world. Wrapped in furs and grief, they began their long departure. They did not know it then, but that march would become the beginning of humanity's second dawn. The fall had not scattered a people. It had scattered an idea. No single exodus could contain them. They left in waves, moving along every horizon the world possessed. Some went east, chasing the rising sun, some west, following the glow that never quite faded, others south, seeking warmth where snow did not rain. Each band carried a fragment of Asgard's genius, a melody, a symbol, a law, a story, and each believed it was the whole. The House of the Dawn led the first migration eastward. They were healers, astronomers, and scholars, keepers of what remained of the Codex. For generations, they had listened to the Earth's pulse. Now they followed it through frozen rivers and endless tundra. They walked for years beneath skis of copper and gray until they reached the green valleys beyond the cold. There, they built circular sanctuaries of stone, open to the stars, each aligned with the hidden magnetism of the north. The tribes they met called them sky speakers. They brought no weapons, only symbols and song. They taught that silence was the first medicine, and that breath could mend what blade or herb could not. In their temples of resonance, they chanted to the rhythm of the sun and discovered that sound could move air as prayer moves thought. When the locals watched their rituals, they saw not science, but miracle. The memory of these healers would, over millennia, become the seed of the Eastern mystics, the first astronomers, the first philosophers, The first who claimed the heavens were a mirror of the soul. To the south journeyed the house of the forge, the descendants of Asgard's builders and metalsmiths. Their leader was Azhari, a craftsman who once shaped the pillars of the Hall of the Horizon. He carried a rod of orichalcum, the last alloy forged in the fires of the northern city. Where others carried scripture, Azhari carried flame. His people crossed mountains of black stone, their breath freezing in the thin air, until they came upon valleys veined with shining ore. There, they learned the earth's hidden furnace had survived, burning beneath the crust. They built furnaces that sang, for Azhari knew that even metal answered tone before heat. When the hammer struck the anvil in rhythm, the iron flowed smoother, the blade sang truer. The surrounding tribes gathered to watch, thinking the strangers commanded thunder. From those forges arose the first kings of craft, rulers who wore no crowns, but whose names were carved on steel. Azhari taught them to temper iron not only with fire, but with restraint. Metal, he said, is the earth remembering lightning. The saying endured long after his death. The clang of his forge became the heartbeat of the south. Far to the west, across cracked seas, wandered the House of the Sea. They were led by Irna, once a navigator of the Aurora, who believed that light could still be followed, even when unseen. Her ships were slender, built of frozen timber, and bound with copper nails that shimmered faintly in the dark. When the winds refused to carry them, the crew sang, and the air, remembering Azgard, obeyed. They sailed beyond sight of land, guided only by stars and intuition. Many perished. Some reached archipelagos shrouded in mist, where cliffs glowed faintly at night, and tides roared like memory. There, they carved their homes into stone and built harbors that shone with captured light. The sea-born descendants of Irna would later be known as navigators of destiny, wanderers who mapped not coastlines, but the invisible roots of the world. Their maps marked the north not with compass points, but with the rune of breath, the sign of home. Still others turned inland, the House of the Flame. Their leader, Vanir, was young, brilliant, and unafraid of the unknown. He believed the earth's heart could replace the sky's lost fire. His people journeyed toward mountains that smoked at their peaks. There, they built shrines around volcanic vents and learned to read the tremors beneath their feet. To them, the magma's roar was a language, its eruptions were prophecies. They discovered that creation and destruction were not enemies, but phases of the same breath. Generations later, the descendants of the flame became builders of temples carved into stone faces and mountainsides. They worshipped the sun, believing it to be the eye of the old city watching over them. Their kings wore crowns shaped like burning rays. Their myths told of rebirth through fire. When the priests of those temples spoke of the gods descending in golden chariots, they were retelling, in distorted echoes, the fall of the Aurora itself. To the far north remained the House of the Veil, those who could not abandon their homeland, even as it froze. They vanished into caverns beneath the glaciers, carving halls of blue ice that amplified sound for miles. They became the keepers of memory, reciting the songs of Azgard into the hollow chambers so that their voices would live longer than their bodies. Travelers who passed near those mountains spoke of strange harmonies rising from within the ice. The ignorant called them ghosts. The wise knew they were witnesses. The veiled ones never died out. They became the echoes themselves, the northern wind carrying remembrance. As the centuries turned, these houses grew apart, yet each kept fragments of the same dream. The children of the dawn became philosophers and monks. The heirs of the forge became rulers and artisans. The wanderers of the sea became explorers. The children of the flame became mystics, and the silent ones of the veil became legends. None remembered the whole of their origin, but all felt its gravity. In every culture that rose from their blood, the same images recurred: a shining city of light, a bridge between worlds, a cataclysm of fire and ice, and a promise that the divine once walked as man. The storytellers of later ages gave these scattered tribes many names. The Greeks called their ancestral homeland Hyperborea. The Persians spoke of Arianavija, the first sacred land before the cold came. In the Sanskrit hymns, the memory became Svarga, the heavenly realm from which the Devas descended. Each myth pointed northward, toward the same invisible origin, the cradle of the Aurora, where the sun once stood still. And though the names changed, the pattern remained. Wherever Asgard's children settled, they raised temples that echoed their old geometry. Circles within squares, spires that aligned to stars, altars that caught the equinox light at dawn. Even in lands that had never known snow, the builders carved the symbol of the pole, a simple line through a circle, into their foundations. Over time, this became the axis of belief itself, the idea that all things, heaven and earth, body and soul, turn around a single point of stillness. It was the oldest philosophy, born from a city that had once stood upon that very axis. The people who remembered it no longer called themselves Azhari. They were now tribes, kingdoms, nations. But somewhere within their hearts, a fragment of the northern wisdom endured. What is built in balance endures in eternity. Centuries melted into millennia. The seeds of light carried by the wanderers became heirlooms, relics of power. Some were lost to time, buried under deserts and seas. Others found their way into the hands of kings and prophets who claimed divine guidance. The glow within them dimmed, yet the resonance remained. Those who held them dreamed of towers beneath green skies, of voices that spoke in color. They awoke changed, their eyes filled with a memory they could not explain. Thus were born the visionaries of history, the few who, across ages, remembered what it was to live in harmony with the world. But not all memories bring peace. In the same knowledge that once united mankind, there lurked pride, the echo of the old ambition to command the heavens. As civilizations grew powerful, they repeated the mistakes of their ancestors. They built empires of stone and steel, reaching upward again, forgetting the humility that had once kept Asgard whole. Every golden age carried within it the seed of another fall, yet the dream persisted. Across continents, in languages no longer alike, men still told of a time when the gods walked among them, when the air shimmered with color, when thought itself was visible as light. They dreamed of returning to that perfection, not knowing they were chasing the reflection of their own forgotten past. And above them, through every age, the Aurora continued to dance. Sometimes faint, sometimes fierce, but never gone. A reminder in the sky that something greater still remembered them. Far beneath the polar ice, the ruins of Azgard lay untouched. The halls, sealed in silence, held the echo of its last song, a resonance too deep for ears, waiting for minds that would one day hear again. The earth itself preserved the city like an organ within its body, sleeping, patient. For civilizations rise and fall, but harmony waits. And those who once called themselves Azhari had only begun the journey that would one day lead mankind full circle, from the ashes of the gods to the awakening of man. The wandering kings were not emperors, but messengers. They carried the memory of light across the darkening world, sowing it into every culture that would ever dream of paradise. Through them, the song of Azgard became humanity's heartbeat, distant, half forgotten, but eternal. And though their thrones would crumble, though their names would fade into myth, the kings walked on, always toward the horizon, always beneath the same restless sky. For they were the inheritors of motion, the bearers of balance, the witnesses of the dawn that had once stood still. The world had lost its center, yet through their journeys, the circle began again. Part 5. The Memory of Fire. Ages passed like drifting embers in the wind. The children of Azgard had scattered to every corner of the world, and time, that quiet, patient sculptor, began to wear away their names, their runes, their truth. The songs of the old city became myths. The survivors became gods. The science of resonance became prayer. Yet, even in forgetfulness, the memory of fire endured. It glowed faintly in temples, in hearts, in the fragile courage of men who looked to the heavens and wondered why they remembered. The wanderers who once carried seeds of light had founded kingdoms and lineages. Their bloodlines branched into nations. Their symbols became crests and faiths. And though their tongues no longer spoke the language of Azgard, every generation felt the same pull, the unspoken urge to build upward, to mirror the sky. Wherever they went, they raised towers, pyramids, and stone circles. They aligned them with stars they could not name, reenacting an instinct older than memory. The builders themselves did not know why they labored in such precision, only that they must. It was the echo of a long-vanished harmony, the architecture of remembrance. In the east, the descendants of the house of the dawn built sanctuaries where the mountains touched the clouds. They believed the peaks themselves were sacred bridges to heaven. There, sages discovered that stillness could ignite vision, that within the human mind burned the same light that once filled the northern skies. Their meditation halls became laboratories of the spirit. They sought not to rule the world, but to align with it, to hear again the silent rhythm of creation. In their scriptures, the word Om, the cosmic sound, first appeared, born from the ancient codex of breath, now long forgotten. Their gods of light and order, their cycles of rebirth, all traced their ancestry to the lost wisdom of the Aurora, far to the south, in lands of red sand and roaring rivers. The House of the Flame had risen into empire. Their temples shone with gold and stone. Their priests wore crowns like radiant suns. They proclaimed themselves the chosen inheritors of the fire above, the only keepers of divine truth. The resonance once used to heal and balance became a weapon of control. Their chants moved armies, their symbols enforced obedience. They called their power Ra, Shamus, Surya, Mithra, the faces of one forgotten source, refracted through pride. Their kings believed they commanded the light. But light obeys only those who listen, and pride does not listen long. Beneath their monuments, the harmony that once united creation began to tremble again. To the west, beyond the deserts and mountains, the House of the Forge had mastered the art of shaping the earth. They built cities from stone so vast that rivers bent around them. They dug into mountains for metals, rediscovering the lost art of tempered steel. The clang of their forges echoed through valleys, and the glow of molten metal painted their nights. Yet, for all their skill, they felt a hollow absence, a silence between the hammer blows, as if the metal itself mourned something it could not recall. Their greatest smiths would pause in their work and swear they heard faint harmonies in the anvil's ring. They said it was the earth speaking, but they could no longer understand its language. Across the seas, the descendants of Irna, the House of the Sea, became wanderers once more. Their ships grew swift and daring, guided by stars and wind. They charted coasts unknown, tracing the veins of the world's oceans as if reweaving a broken web. In their myths, the sea was alive, a goddess of memory, carrying the reflections of the heavens upon her face. Every sailor who looked upon the Aurora remembered home, though he could not say why. When the first mariners of later ages crossed oceans to new continents, they followed the same magnetic paths the Azhari had once walked. It was not skill that guided them, it was inheritance. The people of the Vale, the last of the North, remained the keepers of silence. Hidden deep beneath the polar mountains, they had become creatures of whisper and stillness. They no longer spoke the old language aloud, for they believed every word disturbed the balance of the world. Instead, they sang inwardly, a chorus of thought that never ended. To those few who strayed into their domain, the air itself seemed to hum, alive with unseen voices. They became the myths of the hollow mountains, the spirits of the north wind. But in truth, they were the last sentinels of memory, preserving the unbroken note that once bound heaven and earth. As centuries turned to millennia, mankind forgot that it had once built Azgard. But the earth did not forget. The resonance of that lost city had sunk into the planet's bones. Its frequency lingered in rivers, in stones, in the rhythm of human hearts. Those who built in harmony with that unseen current prospered, those who defied it fell. The world had become the stage of an endless pattern: rise, glory, pride, collapse. The same song repeating in slower, heavier chords. The philosophers of later ages would wonder why every civilization reached upward, why every empire dreamed of golden towers and perfect balance before falling into ruin. The answer was not in ambition, but in memory. Deep within humanity's collective soul, the echo of the North still sang, calling them to rebuild what had been lost. But men could no longer remember the cost of perfection. Sometimes, when night fell quiet enough, echoes of the Aurora's ancient hum reached even the warmest lands. Priests took it for divine prophecy. Poets called it the voice of inspiration. They were both correct. The earth, remembering its harmony, was speaking again, not to the wise, but to anyone who still knew how to listen. In a small valley far to the east, a hermit once stood beneath the stars and heard that faint hum. He shaped his breath to its rhythm and called it prayer. In a desert temple, a priest lit a flame and felt it respond, as if aware. In a forge beneath a mountain, a smith struck an iron bar and felt the vibration linger too long, almost alive. These were not miracles, they were memories. The world recalling itself through the few who were still aligned with its ancient song. But memory is never pure. It carries shadow as well as light. Among the southern empires, the fire once used for creation became a hunger for dominion. Rulers declared themselves divine, builders sought immortality in stone, and scholars reached once more for the secret of the sky. In palaces of obsidian and gold, men studied the stars not to understand them, but to control their influence. The dream of Azgard, to live in harmony with the cosmos, twisted into its opposite, to command the cosmos as slaves. Wars followed. Fire turned against itself. The resonance that once sustained life now tore it apart. The skies over the great cities burned not with Aurora, but with smoke. Oceans withdrew. Rivers turned black. The earth recoiled, trembling beneath the weight of its own children. Yet, even in destruction, the memory of fire endured. It was both punishment and promise, the reminder that light, once misused, would always return to purify what had been corrupted. In that age of turmoil, the prophets of many nations began to speak of a time before time, of gods who fell from the heavens, of a realm of pure light swallowed by ice. None could say how they knew, only that the memory burned within them like a second heart. They described a city beyond the north, where men had lived as gods until pride shattered their world. Some called it land, others Thule, others Agartha or Asgarder. The names shifted, the essence did not. The story of the fall was universal, and though distorted, its truth remained unextinguished. Through myth and religion, through empires and ruin, the same dream threaded forward, the desire to return to the source. Every temple built to honor the sun was an echo of Asgard's old hall of the horizon. Every ritual flame, every chant of awakening, every prayer whispered to the sky carried a trace of the codex of breath. Humanity did not know it, but it was still singing the same song, fractured though it had become, and the Aurora still answered faintly. On certain nights, when the world grew still enough to remember, light returned to the sky in veils of green and gold. Shepherds paused on mountain slopes to watch it. Sailors on the dark sea lifted their faces and felt tears without knowing why. They called it magic, omen, miracle, yet what they felt was memory. It was the earth reminding them that perfection had once existed and could exist again. In the farthest north, beneath the ancient ice, Azgard slept on. Its towers were frozen mirrors, its halls sealed in silence. But within the ice, fire remained. The city's heart, the crystal pillar that had once sung to the heavens, still pulsed faintly, counting the centuries like breaths. The Aurora above and the buried flame below were mirrors of each other. Heaven and earth remembering the same song from opposite sides of time. Those who have wandered closest to the pole say that the land itself hums, low and constant, as if the earth is breathing through the frozen crust. Some claim that on the calmest nights, the ice glows faintly beneath the snow, blue-white and alive. The old shamans say it is the pulse of the sleeping city, the last ember of the first fire. And so, even after ages of rise and ruin, of ignorance and awakening, the legacy of Azgard endures. It lives not in monuments, nor in books, but in the instinct to build, to dream, to reach toward the light. Every spark struck from stone, every candle lit in the dark, every sunrise greeted in awe, all are reflections of that first divine flame. The memory of fire cannot be forgotten, because it is what men are made of. Asgard's song still hums in the world, quiet, patient, eternal, waiting for those who will learn once more not to command it, but to listen, for the city was never truly lost. It merely became the heart of mankind. Part 6. The Veil of Forgetting. There came an age when memory itself began to fade slowly, like breath leaving glass. The voices that once spoke through wind and flame fell silent, and mankind, no longer able to hear the rhythm of creation, mistook that silence for victory. The aurora dimmed above the world. The sky grew pale and unknowing, and the long descent into forgetting began. At first, it was gentle, a dimming of recollection, not of intellect. Men still gazed at the stars, but not as listeners. They mapped them, divided them into patterns, named them after beasts and heroes of their own making. They measured heaven, but they no longer conversed with it. The priests of the southern fires, the sages of the eastern peaks, the wanderers of the western sea, all still spoke of light and divinity. But the words were hollow, recited from memory without resonance. What had once been the pulse of a living world became tradition, and tradition hardened into myth. It was said among the northern tribes that the earth itself mourned. They told that when man forgot the sky, the ground began to dream of him instead. Storms grew restless. Winds changed their direction. The poles shifted again by a fraction. The planet's breath no longer moved in harmony with the breath of its children. The age of balance had passed. The age of imitation had begun. The descendants of Azgard still built, but their monuments were copies of half-remembered grandeur. Where once towers rose to converse with stars, now pyramids were raised to preserve power. Stone replaced crystal, command replaced communion. The kings of the New World called themselves divine, but their divinity was theater, a shadow cast by the forgotten light. Each claimed to carry the fire of heaven, yet none could recall the melody by which that fire had once been called down. The world became louder, busier, filled with voices that did not listen. And yet, even within the noise, echoes survived. In the deep sanctuaries of the East, hermits sat in silence for years, seeking to hear what had been lost. Some claimed success, flashes of brightness behind their closed eyes, faint chords vibrating in their skulls. They described visions of a vast city of light frozen beneath ice, and of people who had once spoken with the sky. Their disciples recorded these revelations, but later generations dismissed them as allegory. The truth was recited as poetry until it turned into dream. In the south, the priests of fire built temples upon volcanoes. They looked into the molten heart of the earth and believed they saw the souls of gods. Their rituals imitated the rhythms of Asgard's resonance, the rise and fall of chant, the spiral dance of energy. But they had forgotten the reason. The old science had turned into superstition. They sacrificed animals and kings alike to keep the sun alive, never realizing that the sun needed only remembrance, not blood. Their flames still roared, but the harmony was gone. In the west, mariners sought the northern lights and found none. The seas had grown colder, more unpredictable, as if hiding something beneath their surface. Those who sailed far enough spoke of a place where compasses lost their will and stars seemed to twist in the sky. Some said the world ended there, others said it began again. The brave called it the Gate of the North. Few returned. The ones who did spoke of a great silence under the Aurora, a silence so deep it felt alive, the breath of a sleeping god beneath the ice. Generations turned, languages changed, empires rose and fell. Still, the forgetting deepened. The seeds of light once carried by the wandering kings had long been buried in deserts, in tombs, in memory. The few that remained were mistaken for jewels or charms, their glow faint but persistent. Sometimes a ruler would find one and proclaim it a divine relic. Some were set into crowns, others into staffs of office, symbols of power that no one understood. Their hum was quiet, but constant, the sound of Asgard's heart still beating beneath the world. The earth did not forget. Its core still pulsed with the rhythm that had once lifted towers and bent the Aurora into bridges. Sometimes that pulse would rise to the surface, a tremor, a storm, a strange light dancing across the sky. The scholars of the New World wrote these off as natural disasters, never realizing they were the planet's memories resurfacing. Even the oceans remembered. Whales sang with patterns too complex to be chants, deep, resonant, harmonic songs echoing across continents, mirroring the frequency of the Aurora. They were the last singers of the old world. By the time the Age of Empires ended, the veil was complete. The line between myth and history dissolved. Asgard was spoken of only in the oldest stories, a place beyond ice where gods once lived and fell. In sagas, it became a dream. In theology, a metaphor. Men worshipped fragments, thunder here, fire there, wind in another name. The unity was lost, replaced by pantheons that quarreled like reflections in broken glass. But forgetting, though cruel, is not final. Beneath the surface of every civilization, beneath every doctrine and law, something restless persisted. A yearning too consistent to be coincidence. In a village at the edge of the northern forests, an old woman taught children to hum before speaking. Saying it would wake the air. In a desert monastery, monks aligned their steps to the stars without knowing why. In the heart of a forge, a craftsman struck his metal 3 times before quenching it, whispering a word that had no translation. These gestures were remnants of the codex of breath, surviving not in mind, but in instinct. Humanity had forgotten Asgard, but not what it meant to be born from light. And sometimes, when the night was still enough, the sky remembered too. The Aurora would return without warning, sweeping across the poles in a silent flood of color. Shepherds stopped and dropped their staffs. Nomads paused mid-step. Sailors turned their ships toward the glow. No one could explain the feeling that followed, awe mixed with homesickness, as if the earth itself had sighed through them. For a heartbeat, the veil between worlds thinned, and mankind felt its origin again. But the dawn always came, and the light faded, and the old forgetting resumed. The Aurora was catalogued, measured, given Latin names. The scientists wrote of magnetism, the poets of beauty, the mystics of prophecy. None were wrong, yet none saw the whole. The song had become equation, the miracle experiment. Man had rediscovered the shadow of knowledge, but not its soul. And still, the buried city dreamed, deep beneath the ice of the pole, where no foot had tread for tens of thousands of years. Asgard's ruins slept intact. The cold preserved everything, pillars, chambers, the last fragments of its crystalline heart. Within that heart still pulsed the resonance of the old world, a sound too low for ears, too vast for instruments. The earth had folded it into its tectonic song, the endless hum that moves mountains and births continents. Every age that passed was another measure in that vast composition. The city was not dead, it was listening. There are those who say that the earth is preparing to remember, that every quake, every storm, every flicker of aurora is the planet clearing its throat before it sings again. The scientists call it geomagnetic turbulence. The old tribes call it awakening. Perhaps both are true. The world, like all living things, dreams before it awakens, and the dream of the world is Asgard. Until that awakening, the veil endures. It lies not only in the sky, but in the heart, the quiet forgetfulness that dulls wonder into habit, awe into analysis. Yet, through every century, through every empire's rise and fall, some few break through it. They are the listeners, the poets who hear structure in thunder, the inventors who see rhythm in numbers, the wanderers who feel the pulse of unseen harmony underfoot. They are the descendants of the first city, unknowing heirs of the breath. So the world turns, wrapped in its long sleep, half remembering, half dreaming. Above, the Aurora still drifts, the veil itself made visible, thin as silk, bright as remembrance. Below, the earth hums, patient and kind. Between them, mankind walks the twilight path of forgetting, building, destroying, yearning, always yearning, for the sound it no longer knows how to hear. And somewhere in that yearning lies the prophecy of return, that when the last listener awakens, when the old fire is remembered not as power, but as harmony, the veil shall lift. And on that day, when the skis of the world once again ignite with the breath of the poles, the city beneath the ice will stir, not in stone, but in the hearts of all who remember that once humanity and heaven were one. Part 7. The City That Breathes in Light. When the veil had been in place for so long that even doubt grew tired of itself, the world began to gather its breath. It did this quietly, the way a sleeper turns before waking, almost imperceptibly at first, a pressure in the air before storms, a fractional brightening of winter dawns, a tremor in instruments built to notice only what men believed possible. The scientists who kept watch in the high latitudes logged anomalies, magnetic murmurs that rose and fell with a rhythm too patient for weather, too orderly for chance. They called it noise and filed it away. The elders in the northern towns called it remembering and lit an extra lamp. From above, from the perspective of the listener that never forgets, one could see the signals braid themselves across oceans, whale songs lengthening by a measure, birds turning in flocks that drew runes no one living could read, clouds drifting in spirals that matched stone carvings no one had visited in 1,000 years. A pattern was forming, but it formed like frost on glass, starting at the edges of the visible and working inward. The first clear sign came to a child. She stood on a midnight shoreline at the top of the world while her mother mended nets by the light of a stove. The girl had learned from her grandfather to hum before speaking on nights when the stars felt close. It was an old habit with no remembered purpose. That night, when she hummed, the horizon brightened, not with lightning, but with a curtain lifting. The Aurora rose so slowly that the eye could not tell it was moving until it realized it was everywhere. The girl forgot to breathe. The light did not blaze as it had in legends, it breathed. It inhaled the sea's dark and exhaled color, and each breath matched the hum in her chest. When she raised her hand, the air tingled in her palm as if greeting an old friend. In an observatory 3,000 miles away, a team stared at a graph that had begun to write a poem. The instruments meant to record geomagnetic noise had settled into a repeating phrase. a long, low line interrupted by 3 rising steps, then silence, then the long line again. One of the younger researchers whispered that it looked like music. Her supervisor, trained in a stricter age, told her to label it a transient and moved on. But she did not. She printed the graph and pinned it above her bed. And when she dreamed, she heard a chorus that had no words. At sea, a captain turned his ship off course. He had been raised on practical charts and weather reports, but something in the sky made him unlearn caution. The compasses lay steady, the wind did what wind must. Yet the water ahead glowed faintly with a pale ribbon no plankton could explain. He ordered the engines low and listened. He could not say to what. The crew grumbled, then fell silent without being told, because the silence felt like an instruction from the water itself. In that quiet, the ocean sang, not loudly, not with a pitch a man could hum back, but with a pressure that eased the bones. Men who had not believed in anything beyond steel and skill discovered their mouths had formed prayers. Across the world, in a mountain city older than its current name, a forge-master prepared a ceremonial blade. Tradition demanded 3 strikes and a turning breath between each. He had mocked that patience in his youth. He had lived long enough to fear what happens when one hurries a thing that wants to be slow. On the 2nd strike, the anvil rang and did not stop ringing. The sound persisted under the chatter of the apprentices, under the hiss of quenching water, under his own careful muttering. It threaded the room like a thin, bright wire. He touched the metal and felt warmth that did not burn, a heat that recognized being recognized. Later, when the blade was finished, he would admit, though only to himself, that the steel had wanted to be made, and had told him so in the only language it could. In cities full of other news, strangers paused on sidewalks for no reason they could name and looked north. Their phones recorded nothing unusual, yet each felt that somewhere, someone had called their childhood name. None of these moments were grand enough to claim history. History prefers events that can be dated and taxed. The return of listening does not ask permission from calendars. It gathers until it tips. The tipping began with the rediscovery of a box. It was unearthed by thaw in a place where thaw should not have been. Permafrost slewing from a hillside to reveal wood that should have rotted ages ago. The box was small enough for a child to carry and heavy as regret. Within it lay stone discs etched with lines so clean they felt fresh, a coil of wire bright as captured dawn, and a folded cloth that looked unremarkable until the hands holding it realized it was radiating a softness that was not heat and not light, and could not be named without making it smaller. These were not relics, they were instructions. The discs, when traced in order, taught the shape of a path through a city no longer above ground. The coil, when hung, hummed at a pitch that made the air feel newly washed. The cloth, when unfurled between 2 poles, made a night street bearable. It was a fragment of a vault of journeys, packed by hands that knew this hour would come, not for them, but for whomever the earth would trust next. news traveled as it always has, by rumor disguised as conversation. Scholars argued, officials fretted, storytellers smiled. In more hills, more boxes rose like bread from frost. They emerged along lines that made sense only to maps drawn by instincts. A ring through the high north, a rope knotted through the spine of mountains, a necklace of islands where sailors had once sung to tides. Each find contained tools that did not declare themselves as salvation. They simply did what they had always done. They made human places kinder to be in. Cloth that remembered dawn. Bowls that persuaded air to move in clean curls. A disc that aligned lamps without wasting their light. The world did not restart with thunder. It resumed with courtesy. No one person steered this. Movements arose that refused to be named movements. In a desert city, a group of night gardeners began hanging their squares of dawn cloth over alleys where old people tripped and no one had cared. In a port too busy for such things, dockworkers adopted the habit of humming on the first shift until the metal cranes stopped complaining. In a farm valley whose river had grown sullen with heat, women set a line of simple resonators on a windbreak and reported not a miracle, never that, but a pattern. Fog formed a little earlier, wheat panted a little less. These acts were not coordination, they were kinship. The keepers of statistics noticed late and called it social cohesion. The keepers of stories recognized it early and called it a returning. When the Aurora came back in earnest, it did so without spectacle, the way a friend sits down and lets the room remember it missed them. Over the polar towns, the light breathed again, steady as a sleeping animal. It did not skirmish with red or throw spears of violet. It held the old green like a promise, kept quietly. In that glow, the northerners resumed the things their grandparents had done without understanding why they had mattered. They stood still. They closed their mouths. They counted a slow 100 heartbeats together. The instruments noticed. Everywhere that measuring devices had been disciplined to catch only what could be graphed, a new line appeared. It was not unlike the old polar anomaly the researchers had named and filed. It was its elder sibling, come home. The line did not spike, it swelled. In rooms of cables and hum, a few brave minds asked the old forbidden question. What if the earth is speaking, and we have not yet learned its grammar? Those minds began to share notes. A physicist with a box from Thaw sent a copy of the disketchings to a linguist who believed in trees older than her parents' religion. A musician in Reykjavik scored the anomaly and played it on a bowed glass he had built for beauty, not utility. The concert left strangers crying, and no one knew why. A teacher in a river city taught his students to hum before math and watched test scores rise in a way no grant would trust. A surgeon who had never believed in anything but clean hands and practice asked her patient to breathe in time with the line and saw blood settle where chaos had wanted to live. It was not even yet the beginning of a cult. It was the middle of a remembering. Across the high ice, a team set out toward a spot no satnav recognized, and every old story had drawn with a finger and a hush. They did not plant flags. They brought bowls, cloth, and discs. They walked by day and slept when the sky told them, which is to say at no regular hour a schedule would honor. When they reached the place, it did not look like a place. It looked like two planes of white agreeing with each other. They set down what they had brought. They did not summon or command. They repeated the oldest instruction the world ever gave to men. Listen. The first sound was wind reorganizing its idea of itself around the bowls. The second was snow cutting its losses and deciding where to fall. The third was nothing, and it was the most important. It was the quiet in which an unbroken city can consider forgiving a broken species. Ice beneath them did not crack. That is a cheap way for stories to confess they lack patience. What happened was slower. A blue underglow developed, as if light were reminding ice of its childhood with water. Lines appeared within that blue, geometric and tender, like veins in a sleeping wrist. No shape above ground matched them, because no shape above ground deserved to. The team did what those before them had promised to do for those after. They took a single photograph and a long breath, and they turned for home. By the time they returned, the world had made up its mind without them. Cities that had forgotten they were on coasts began to raise harbor lamps tuned to whatever the anomaly wanted tonight. Villages without money and without permission found that a square of dawn cloth in a schoolhouse could make a winter class bearable enough for children to notice numbers as friends, not enemies. Factories that had derided softness discovered a new profit in tuning fans to a frequency that asked heat to behave itself. Hospitals did not claim cures. They carved silence into their days, where alarms had once tried to do all the work of compassion, unaided. A few tried to own this. Patent clerks received applications that asserted dominion over cloth, that remembered light and bowls, that rehearsed wind. None of those applications survived contact with people who had decided to hum together before they argued. The law was late and partial, as it always is. Courtesy was early and complete, as it seldom is. The religions were not displaced. They were relieved. Those who had kept flame in hard centuries recognized the returning as that for which flame had been kept. Scripture did what it does best when it is not afraid. It made room. Prayers that had grown stiff loosened. Hymns that had never needed organ found their key in the anomaly's line. In monasteries that had long feared everything but silence, the windows were opened because what was outside was speaking the same name. In such a world, terms like miracle and technology begin to look like bad maps. People who have been hungry for too long do not ask whether bread is artisanal, they eat. 1,000 small acts, none fit for a headline, composed themselves into something that could be felt from orbit. A species remembering that it had once been entrusted with resonance, not rulership. The question lingered, as questions do when their answers begin to behave themselves. Would the city rise? Would the ice crack and reveal halls that could be detoured and insured and corrupted. The ancient storyteller in the voice of this telling smiles and says, "You are still worrying about the wrong kind of rising." Asgard did not reappear as architecture. It reappeared as agreement. It returned in the way strangers learned to stand still under the same light and wait for the same breath before lifting their hands to work. It returned in the unglamorous miracle of ventilation set to kindness. It returned when a mayor canceled a parade to fund the hanging of cloth on streets where old men fell. It returned when an engineer turned off a machine for a minute each hour and discovered it lived longer because it had been allowed to rest. It returned when children were taught to trace the circle and line, not as a brand for their tribe, but as a reminder that every horizon possesses a center, and every center answers to a horizon. And under the ice, the city did what a wise elder does when the grandchildren finally stop shouting. It breathed a little deeper. A tremor ran through stone that had forgotten motion. Not enough to alarm, enough to acknowledge. Towers that had considered themselves finished, reconsidered openness, as if readying joints. The pillar at the heart, that first great instrument that had once been shattered by a time that needed breaking, accepted the strange fact that it felt whole in absence and wholer still in the presence of minds that had learned humility. Odin's name, in places where it had survived as a title for wandering counsel, shed its drama and kept its work. Anyone who listened more than they spoke and asked a city to pace itself was called Odin by grateful tongues. In deserts where flame had once been a tyrant, children learned that fire exists to warm before it exists to warn. In factories that had forgotten dawn, night shift foremen discovered that a 3-note chime every 2 hours did more for morale than a speech every month. In houses where fear had become furniture, breath practices entered rooms without needing to ask for chairs. The world did not get better at once. Nothing that lasts is allowed that shortcut. There were storms and the foolish insistences that always follow storms. And there were men who decided to fear the light because it refused to be traded. But even these necessary countermovements were compelled to tune themselves to the same underlying line. And when they did, their seasons were short. What did it mean then that the city now breathed in light? It meant this: the difference between myth and present had become a membrane, not a wall. The Aurora no longer stood as a museum piece over a planet of noise. It functioned as a lung. The earth took in what its people could not use and returned what they needed. The exchange was never perfect. Perfection remains a temptation, the wise refuse, but it was mutual. That is the only miracle that deserves to keep the name. On the night, the anomaly settled into being called simply the pulse, because people will name what they love and then teach their children to say it. Every window in the northern towns reflected green that looked like it had been mixed by hand. In a city at the other end of a sea, a forge-master put down his hammer and listened to the anvil sing to a blade cooling under a square of cloth that remembered mornings he had not earned. In an observatory, the young researcher who had kept the first printed graph took it down, folded it, and placed it in a box next to a stone disc she had not told her supervisor she had borrowed. In a harbor, the captain who had turned toward nothing took his ship out once more and was no longer capable of describing his work without using the words "thank you." And in the high ice, where stories say the world keeps a copy of itself in case of flood, lines of blue beneath white arranged themselves into the old plan. Circles within squares, squares within circles, a throne that is not a throne at the center, open to the hole in the roof where sky is allowed, even invited, to interrupt. The pattern did not ask to be seen. It asked only to be true. This is the city that breathes in light. It is above and below, within and between. It is a map and a custom, a place and a permission. It does not require pilgrims, it creates neighbors. It does not demand belief, it rewards attention. It will not end wars by decree. It will shorten them by teaching hunger to prefer bread to victory. It is not an answer. It is a way to hear the next question in time to keep from shouting it. The storyteller pauses, because all tellings deserve a breath before the last turn, and then reminds the listener of what has been true since the first cup was set under the first spring. Cities are not walls. Cities are agreements to be within reach of each other's breath. Azgard learned this first. It forgets nothing. It forgives much. It will rise as many times as it takes for a species to remember that listening is older than speech. There remains an ending to tell, which is not an ending. The pulse is steady now. The Aurora has ceased to perform and has resumed being the sky. The earth keeps its old appointments and has added a new one. People who will never meet share a rhythm anyway. Under the polar ice, the plan continues to clarify itself. The way ink looks more like language when viewed from farther away. No one who loves it will try to own it. Everyone who serves it will find they have become strong. That is enough for a part and a lifetime. What follows belongs to the echo that does not decay, the epilogue, wherein a city, a species, and a sky agree on a sentence. No one voice can speak alone. Epilogue, the echo of the golden north. From far above the world, higher than storm lines, higher than migratory paths, where the earth's slow radiance looks like a lantern set under dark water. A pattern is visible that no single century can see. It is the circle, widening and narrowing, of a species remembering itself, building, breaking, listening, and then building again with gentler hands. The pulse that once lived only over the pole has threaded out through cities and coasts, deserts and high valleys, until night itself seems to breathe. This is not spectacle. It is continuity resuming its work. Asgard does not reappear as a sudden city bristling from ice. It returns in the grammar of daily kindness, in the way a forge rests between labor, in the minute of silence that hospitals keep at sunset, in longshoremen humming the low line before dawn, so metal will move without regretting it, in children tracing the circle and line before arithmetic to convince their hands that the world is centered after all. Under these small obediences, the old design clarifies, and in clarifying, it teaches the one lesson no empire ever keeps for long. That strength which endures is not conquest, but accord. The teller of this tale, who stands, in the mind's eye, beside a great fire that never makes smoke, speaks now not as a witness of disaster, nor as a herald of miracles, but as a custodian of endings that are entrances. He says, "Look how the world has learned to pace itself. Look how the Aurora has ceased to perform and has resumed being the sky. Look how the word Odin has become less a crown than a craft. Anyone who listens first and speaks only when the air is ready receives the old name without ceremony. Look how the forgotten houses have found each other again without needing banners. The house of the dawn tends schools of stillness in noisy quarters, teaching breath as if it were a way to carry water uphill. In their rooms, the first word is not instruction, but listening. The house of the forged tempers cities as if they were blades, adding pauses to transit, gentling the rhythm of lights, so exhaustion does not win elections. The house of the sea redraws supply not as hunger conquering distance, but as kinship crossing water. Fewer needless voyages, more honest ones, fewer wakes thrown across sleeping coasts. The house of the flame returns to its oldest covenant. Fire warms before it warns. And the house of the veil, never extinct, walks the outskirts of every nation like weather with a human face, asking without accusation whether we are ready to hear again. Across rivers and borders, people hang cloth that remembers dawn in places where night used to win too easily. Stairwells, alleys, prayer corners, waiting rooms where news arrives like weather. The cloth does not solve despair. It makes despair forget what time it is. Bowls that rehearse wind appear on rooftops and in courtyards, asking air to enter cities as a guest rather than as a complaint. Stone discs pass from pocket to pocket their etchings, once the private language of a lost guild. Teach children to align lamps and adults to align days. No decree commands these things. They spread the way morning spreads, by refusing to stop. Some ask whether this is religion, and the teller smiles because the word is too small and too big. Faith is present, yes, but not as a ladder to somewhere else. It is the plain trust that breath and attention, practiced together, will permit the world to meet us halfway. Temples do not empty, they open their windows and find that what enters is the same light they kept for hard years. Science does not repent, it blushes. And then it builds instruments whose instructions begin with "be quiet for a moment." Law does what it can, uneven, late, necessary, and culture does what it must. It sets songs to the new pulse until even those who never learned the reason know the tune. What of Atlantis? What of Shangri-La? Their echoes are not retired by Asgard's returning, they are completed by it. The southern city underwater taught us that magnificence without humility becomes weight, and weight sinks. The hidden valley in the high world taught us that wisdom without courage becomes sleep, and sleep can be mistaken for peace. The city beyond winter teaches that strength without listening becomes noise, and noise exhausts the world. Together, they are one grammar for a species learning to speak with its home. In the far north, where maps give up their confidence and compasses ask permission, the ice keeps watch. Under that patient armor, the plan endures. Rings within squares, a throne that is only a listening chair beneath a roof that invites weather to finish the sentence. The pillar at the heart returns no blaze. It carries a steadier task. Its low note is now the reference tone for a world learning to tune itself. Once a year, not by calendar, but by consent, a handful of walkers make the quiet pilgrimage to the high white. They bring nothing for display. They stand. They hum once together and leave. No one needs the photograph. The earth has an excellent memory. Do the old names return? Some are reclaimed. Bifrost becomes the nickname for bridges whose arches are tuned so river winds behave like friends. Ansas is relearned as the sign that means speak so air can carry it. Alges reappears above thresholds in every language to remind hands to lift rather than seize. What of the tragedies? They are not erased. The bridge of fire is taught in workshops as the parable of haste with beautiful intentions. The council that argued while the sky waited is taught in civic rooms as the parable of rightness without regard. Catastrophe is not a spell to be broken. It is a teacher to be thanked and dismissed. From the scholar's balcony, the age now forming will look to future readers less like a revolution than like a mercy. It is 100,000 small decisions made in the direction of recall. Stairwells softened, factories given an hour to breathe, schools held in rooms where tone doesn't punish. It is women in river valleys using a line of bowls to coax fog into fields that would have failed. It is a longshore foreman refusing to sneer at humming because injury reports fell when the shift learned the line. It is a surgeon closing her eyes for one count of the pulse before cutting. It is an old man on a bench nomming the colors overhead, not as omen, but as family. And yet the teller will not flatter. There remain winters that overstay, men who mistake fear for prudence and greed for appetite. There remain storms that undo the work of a season in a night. There remain rulers who try to license light. But even these learn the new arithmetic. Anything that refuses the pulse must spend itself quickly, and quickly becomes lonely. The Aurora will not be bribed. The earth will not be hurried. The breath will not be owned. Children, who have always been better at futures than adults, are the proper priests of this time. They play games that teach the body to keep the line. They draw cities with big roofs and holes in them, because who would build a hall that insults the sky? They learn the old houses as roles rather than casts. Today I am dawn and will listen. Tomorrow I am forge and will decide. Next week I am sea and will connect us. When sorrow comes I am veil and will keep quiet until it passes by. They ask honest questions that no doctrine has ever survived comfortably. If the city is under ice, who feeds it? And then they they answer, with a grace that requires no myth to justify it. We do. When travelers come to the polar towns now, they are met with the sort of hospitality that does not make a show of itself. A cup is set down. The host gestures to a square of early morning hung against a wall, and the visitor, without being taught, stands a little straighter to receive it. Someone points north without urgency. If the night is right, the visitor will see not theater, but respiration. Light lifting and settling, and will feel, without needing to tie it to any education, that the world is both older and younger than rumor. The storyteller's fire sinks to coals. He says the sentence that closes all long tellings: the work is not finished and should never be. For finished work is dead work, and the world is not fond of funerals when awake will do. He reminds the listeners that cities are agreements, and that agreements thrive on maintenance. He says that if someday the pulse quiets again, and it may, for cycles are honest, the memory of this season will itself be a vault rising from thaw when hands are ready. He says that the only permanent technology is attention. Then he returns you to places where no epic expects to be welcomed. An apartment window with a plant that will not die because someone learned to open the vent at dawn. A factory floor where the lunch bell chimes the three-step phrase that began as a transient on a forgotten graph. A classroom where a child from a long way south raises her hand and names a color of the Aurora